It's time now for Perspective. My guest today is a man called Johnny Pitts, a TV presenter and a self-taught photographer from Sheffield in the UK, who's the curator of the award-winning online journal Afropean.com. He's also the author of Afropean Notes from Black Europe, and most recently, he became the guest curator of the latest edition of The Eyes, an online periodical published in both French and English. This year's edition is dedicated to the exploration of that concept of Afropeanness, a term born in the 1990s, which is, of course, a portmanteau of African and European. Johnny Pitts, thank you so much for speaking to us on France 24 today. Let's kick off with an obvious question. What is it to be Afropean?
Initially, when I set out to write this book, I thought that question would be very easy to answer, and I realised it's actually very complicated. It shifts, it means lots of things to lots of people. But for me, it's something that allowed me to take in my multiple allegiances, which are African and European, and put them together in a way that was whole and unhyphenated, not half this or half that.
And what is it for you about the medium of photography specifically that lends itself so well to the exploration of that kind of multiplicity of Black identity?
Well, the thing with photography is it's about mood and atmosphere. So I'm a writer as well. First and foremost, perhaps a writer, but I deal with photography a lot. And I think what photography allows you to do is not be so direct. It allows you to share a mood, an idea in visual form of what this coming together of cultures might mean without having to convince anybody, through a theory or through an argument with your words. It just shows what is. And that's what I love about photography.
And have you found that there is an established sense of a pan-European sense of Black identity? Because some people might question whether one term can accurately convey how many different disparate identities might live within that category.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's big disjunction even just in France between perhaps the African community and the Caribbean community, and that you find that all over Europe. In Portugal, there is disjunction between the Cape Verdean community and the Angolan community. So the answer to your question in many ways is yes and no. No, in the respect that there is not one thing that you can say all of these communities have in common. Perhaps apart from the fact that we're living in the wake of European colonialism, and by virtue of us being brown-skinned and in Europe, we're kind of visual markers of this thing that happened around the world, this European expansionism, and we're here now and we're grappling with these multiple cultures. And I think that Black communities would do well to talk to each other, to realise that we're not just marooned in these small pockets of communities all around Europe, but that actually there are many of us, at least 14 million on the continent. And I think where there is a collective, a group, there is more power.
And you spoke just then about the legacy of colonialism in so many countries across Europe, but there are some Black communities in Europe that don't have that direct link to colonial masters. For example, in Russia, I know you've written about Russia in the past. Do you think that, say, the Black community in Russia has a very different relationship with the state compared to, say, Black French people or Black British people?
Yeah, absolutely. But I don't think it's true to say that they don't have any connection to colonialism, because actually you find that the history of the Black community in Russia is in some ways a response to colonialism by virtue of the fact that the USSR, Russia, communist countries in general were helping to power up African independence movements as a reaction against Western imperialism. So it's still very much connected to that story of colonialism. It might be kind of, in many ways, born out of a kind of alternate history, but it is still in some ways a reaction to colonialism. So I find that that there are many Black communities struggling in Russia at the moment, but it was amazing to me to learn about the history of somebody like Alexander Pushkin, who has a African heritage, and then also looking at these ties that were made, this international friendship during the much of the 20th century that was forged between Russia and Africa. To me, that's really fascinating. It's something that growing up during those sort of like remembering the sort of latter days of the Cold War and thinking of all that Cold War propaganda we got in the West, it's something that we didn't get taught much about. That Russia wasn't just this evil empire actually, but did much to try and connect to African countries.
You're clearly fascinated by the ways different black communities across Europe express themselves, their links. Is there something political there? Is it a sort of utopian vision that you're trying to put forward? Or do you think you're more expressing a reality that's there that people don't necessarily know how to discuss?
Hopefully both. I think when you try and document the truth, that truth you would like to think has a way of being prescient. So like my work is very much from the street up. It's not dealing with politicians and what's happening in areas of officialdom. It's dealing with the sort of messy, real multiculturalism that we find on Europe's streets. And in that way, I feel like it becomes a bit of an it's where the future is in incubation. You know, you're telling the truth and you're showing what's really happening away from all this political rhetoric. And I think that in itself is actually quite political. I think there is almost a sort of a working class politics at play in my work, and in that way, yeah, something utopian as well. I'm trying to connect, and I'm trying to build a vision of the future that is multicultural. I haven't given up on that word yet.
And you are currently working on a new body of work, I think, that explores the concept of black Britishness specifically. You, of course, are British. We are, of course, as we know, you were meant to be with us in the studio in the midst of a COVID pandemic that continues. Omicron is now in our midst. Rates of vaccination in the UK are significantly lower among ethnic minority groups, including black people. Is there something you think the UK government might be missing when it comes to reaching out to these communities?
Well, let's start with not calling Muslim women letterboxers. There's a huge mistrust, I think, that the black community has for the government because of the people who are in power. And it's so interesting that we have probably one of the most ethnically diverse cabinets in history, right? But it's not multicultural. These people all come from one kind of culture, and that culture is very often private school and maybe Oxbridge. So it's a very complicated situation. But I think the mistrust that the black community has for what the government line, if you will, it is born out of the people who are in power and the things that they've said and the things that they've done. We think about the Windrush scandal. So that's where the mistrust comes from.
And there has, of course, been a huge reckoning with the way the Windrush generation was treated by authorities over years. Do you think there is generally a positive movement towards being more sensitive to the political, historical factors at play when we talk about black British communities?
Yes, I mean, I don't think it's coming from the top. I think there is a lot of grassroots activism that has been taking place that is really ushering that conversation forward, and it's an important conversation to have. And I think that, Britain, like France, like many countries in Europe, are kind of reckoning with their histories, and it's on these younger activists and writers and scholars to really try and make these countries deal with the ramifications of their history.
We could talk about this forever, but that is all the time we have. Johnny Pitts, curator of Afropean.com and many other things besides. Thank you very much for speaking to us on France 24.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.